Welcome back to Space to Lead, the podcast where grassroots leadership takes centre stage. Leadership gets to be unshakable and real people make real change. I'm Gemma Rose Peacock, and this is the Unshakable Leaders 100 series. Our salute to everyday trailblazers who refuse to stay stuck in old leadership moulds. Every episode, we dive into stories of bold individuals who've leaned into uncertainty, owned their power, and learned to lead from the inside out. We unpack their wins, their stumbles, and the simple shifts, one question, one honest answer, one deliberate pause that transformed their journeys. Today, I'm honoured to introduce Katie Godden. From rural New South Wales, a teacher turned global educator of communication, devoted mum, and lifelong diabetes type 1 advocate. Katie's lived experience taught her leadership isn't about just a title, it's about those tiny pivots in conversation that reroute lives for the better. In our chat, you'll hear how Katie decided to go all in on herself when misalignment threatened her purpose, why she moves faster than doubt ever can, and how mastering the power of pause under pressure completely shifted the energy in a room. Expect raw trial and error, scrappy pivots, and the inner compass that keeps her anchored in her truth. If you're ready to plug into Katie's hard-won wisdom, let's dive in and learn from Unshakable Leader number 2 in our series, Katie Godden. Welcome, Katie. Thanks so much for agreeing to be part of Space to Lead.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So just so that our listeners can get to know who you are, do you want to introduce yourself in a way that feels good to you and tell us who you are and the things that you love the most?
Absolutely. So I am a rural country girl from Australia, New South Wales, grew up in a very small town of 2,500 people, and have really got a love for the land, have really got a love for people and connection. And I just think humans are amazing. So that's one of my huge passionistas. And I got into this space of what I do being an educator by training. So worked in primary school training children, educating children. And then I went into educating teachers. And then my life just evolved from there. So I've come from a background of many things, which all leads us to where we are, doesn't it?
Yeah, wearing many hats.
We are wearing many hats. Yes. And I love them all. I think that's the beauty that we get to move through, is the fact that we can choose to have multiple hats. You know, when someone asks who I am, that was always one of the hardest things to respond to, in regards to the hats, because, you know, I'm a mum, I've got 2 amazing young humans, I've got my husband, I come from a farming background, I've come from an education background, I also love people, I love connecting, I love nature. And so all of those elements bring together to make this beautiful cocktail of who we be.
Yeah, I love that. A cocktail of who we be. And we're so multifaceted, you know, like, so you're right. It's sometimes quite difficult to be like, in this introduction, what hat do I speak to or what part of me? Um, and so that's why I love opening up the question in the way it did, because you get to share, you know, what is most important for you and what you love the most. And that can often bring out, you know, all aspects of ourselves. So we're not kind of leaving anything out for people to get to know, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
completely agree. Yeah.
So what's your mission? What's your impact? What's your kaupapa? What's your business and what are you here to change?
Yeah. So one of my driving forces, it's been really interesting. It's been an evolution, I would say. There's never been just this is what I'm on the planet to do. Like, there's never been for me in that moment. You know, I used to watch kids in school and they're like, no, I'm going to be a doctor. And then they go and do all the things to be a doctor, or I'm going to be this. And then they go and do all of the things. what I do, my mission is to really transform lives one conversation at a time.
Wow.
That's it.
Transform lives.
Yeah. And so the big driving force behind that is really learning how to understand the dynamics of humans.
Mm.
And I think there's a bit of a false perception out there that we need to do grandeur, that everything needs to be grand and huge and large and the big grand canyon of life. And I think sometimes we miss the impact we can make in the subtlety of the moment. And so for me, it's like if we can help people who are people leaders to impact lives one conversation at a time, like we just don't know one word, one sentence, one phrase, one question, how it can absolutely shift someone in a totally different trajectory in their life. And I think if we can get back to the grassroots of that power that we can have to impact each other in a positive light, then for me, like we're winning. We're
Yeah,
winning.
totally. And I love how you mentioned grassroots because that's what this podcast is all about. Activating and nurturing grassroots leadership, the kind of leadership that's within us all. And we've spoken about this before about reclaiming that. So you're doing that in it's same. You're doing that in a different way, one conversation at a time.
Yes.
Yes. I love
Yes,
that.
absolutely. Because I think it's important. That's the thing for me is what I believe gives us our strength in leadership is us being able to be so grounded in ourselves
Mm,
and yet also flexible enough to adjust to the needs of what's actually going on in the setting
yeah.
without losing ourselves.
Without losing ourselves. That is so key, isn't it?
So many times, in my lifetime, there's been many times where I have lost myself in a conversation because of many reasons. I thought someone was better at it. I thought that they
Mm,
had the right answer. I thought that that was the way it had to be done. I thought that that was a should and this is a must, and went for everything outside of myself and let the world lead me, rather
yes.
than where my mission is now is to like lead myself in conversations, lead myself in my business, lead myself in my family, and being at home with myself in that.
Yes. Yeah, so let's touch on that a bit, if you don't mind. In terms of your leadership story, like, can you tell us a bit about what that was like for you in terms of, perhaps I'm thinking about the listeners here who may be like, I kind of get what you're talking about when it comes to leadership, but it feels exclusive. It feels like leadership's reserved for those people over there and it's not within me. So when you're talking about the passion that goes alongside what you do in all the hats, how
Yes.
did that come about for you?
Oh, great question. I think a lot of it comes from just living life
Mm.
and taking ownership of my role that I play in my life. And so
Taking ownership. Oof.
yes.
Yeah.
And so when I think that's been the key for me. I really sat at a place of others knew better for me. My background is I've been experiencing type 1 diabetes since I was 4 years old. And so part of my journey was the fact that I didn't know better. And so I had to be led
Mm.
in order to essentially survive. And so I think for a long time, I just built in this unknowing mechanism that, oh, they're leading because they know, and I don't know. And then it got to a point, I guess, where I'd had so many times that people told me that I was wrong. And I got to that little rebellious
Yeah.
teen. That little like
Yeah, we know.
you flick your hair and you come through and you're like, hang on, I'm a little spicy now. And I got to a point where enough was enough, that I all of a sudden there was something switched inside of me that was, actually, I live with my body for 24 hours a day. I am actually the expert at this. Yes, you know your thing. However, I kind of got what's going on here because I live with it 24 hours a day. And so if I look at that level of leadership, it came to a point where I just decided that actually I know me.
Yeah, the power dynamic had to shift, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And it didn't matter who I was in front of. It didn't matter what their title was or who they presented to in the world, or how great and amazing they were. What I came to realize was that actually I had a shoulder to shoulder walking equal power, because yes, they know the stuff that I don't know, and I know the stuff that they don't know. And together, this is where we get to have this team. And I like to call them my teamies. And even in, if I go to other contexts of my life, similar things have happened, being a mum and having to come to the point, well, actually, how do I want my kids to grow up? And looking really at like, what's my outcome that I want for them? And I want to have two incredible humans that go into the world that respect people and respect themselves. And so then everything I get to lead to that outcome. And do I get it right all the time? Probably not. Do I have a good crack at it? Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think it was? What skills do you think that you had to find or utilize to do that, to level the playing field, so to speak, to shift the power dynamic? And what did that do for you?
That's a big question.
It is a big question. Feel free to answer it as you feel.
Feel
Go
free
into it.
through, Katie. Yeah. So I guess it depends on the context. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm very context dependent with some of my answers here. But if I think about it from the leadership of the role that I play now in my business and who I be, and coming from that place, I had to do the work on myself.
Yeah.
Really, that was when you asked the question of like, what skill did I need to find? I needed to find the skill that allowed me to access my being, that accessed who I am. And the more that, like, what are my driving forces? What are my values? What actually motivates or pushes me in a certain direction, and starting to find those things and then getting them to work for me.
Yeah.
So it was initially always starting with that self-awareness and coming into a place of like, I knew that things had to change. I just knew it. And I got in that uncomfortable place of uncertainty, not knowing. Some people call it a crisis moment. I like to call it a change moment. It's that moment where you've just, you come face to face with yourself in whatever context that could be. It could be a health thing. It could be a relationship thing. It could just be that you have a conversation with someone and all of a sudden you what I like to call, I'm up against myself, and I'm like, hang on a second. And I feel that the grunt inside of me, like the bulldog, the fire in my belly, whatever that is. And then come from a place, well, like, am I willing to sit here in this, or do I want something else?
Yeah, what's got to shift here? That feeling where you feel like you've almost backed yourself into a corner and you're doing the same, approaching things in the same way. You're using those default responses time and time again, and it's getting nowhere. And the things start to stack up until you're like, something's got to give here.
Yeah.
Am I looking externally for that give to happen, or can I actually use my leadership that is always within us all to find a new way here?
Yes. And I think that's the gold nugget.
Yeah.
When we look outside, in my opinion, when we look outside of ourselves to make that change, nothing changes. It's not until we actually are willing and curious enough to go inside, because you're right, it unlocks, it's already in there. And so it's bringing it to awareness. It's utilizing it. It's living to it. And once again, it all circles back really to that real owning yourself inside.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
And
owning your positions. Oh, sorry to talk
no,
over you.
no.
I'm just thinking
Owning
like
your, what did you say? Owning your
owning your position.
position.
Like, where are you playing? So cool. My position is I'm a mum. So own that role. Like, be that mum that, you know, that you want to be, because we've all got the vision of who we want to be. Like, own that role. Or if it's, you know, in business, like, what's my role in this business? I've played many roles. One was being the head trainer for a global training company. And I had to really own, when I really stepped into leadership, like this was one of the pivotal moments for me, was when I owned that role. When I actually stepped in, I took full responsibility for what was required, how I could do better, how I could show up in that, how I could lead others, how I could make decisions, how I could stand in it and own it, even though I'd never done it before.
Yeah, I
And
think
so,
it's key what you said there in terms of taking full responsibility because, you know, and let's look at the alternative for you in that situation. You could be in that, you know, global role, um, and instead of owning things and taking responsibility for whatever it was, here and there, you could be saying, you could be complaining about the person above you who's
yeah,
restricting, or, you know, like you could be putting the ownership externally to try and, you know, play that story out. Um,
yeah.
but I
And I
think
think that
there's something in that, isn't there?
there definitely is, because if I think about it, to the one, that role particularly, yeah, if we were to dive and just pull back the veil on that a little bit, is
Mm.
when I look at that, when I first began in that role, I didn't own it. I
Okay.
came in and I was like, I was really uncertain. I was unsure. I was looking for answers outside. And the man that I was working for, he didn't know the answers. And then I'd be like, okay, so it got to a point where I couldn't get answers outside. And so I either needed to sink or swim.
Yeah.
And so that was the point that I had to be like, well, actually, this isn't working the way that I want it to work. I'm not getting what I need from others. I got to find it within me. And then I can go out and I can show up and I can, oh, this is what we need to do. This is what needs to happen. And I started becoming more decisive, more confident, and I owned it. So it was that was the transition for me between when I was really leading in that role and when I was not.
Yeah. And so that was the real moment that you stepped into your full capacity as a leader, um, to kind of get some traction on that situation. And
Yeah.
so you went from, you know, not having or not kind of performing at the levels that you wanted to. You couldn't get the answers from above or externally. And then, so what did you do? Did you like try things out? Did you try things on for size? Did you play with, okay, let's see if this works? Like, how did that go about? What was the transition?
Oh my God, it was so messy. It was
Yes,
so messy.
it always is.
It was so messy. It always is. Is I had to test and I had to test trial and error a lot of things. I had to zoom out and I had to sit back and really just look at what was going on here
Yeah,
and what can I test out? What can I try to make it easier for us, to make us better? And so it was like, where is the biggest pain point? And then I'd go into like finding a solution for that. And so being quite solution focused is something I pride myself on, is looking for solutions.
yeah,
And that was how I fumbled through. And so the next training we'd implement, and then it's like, right in the middle of the training, we'd have to pivot. And so I had to be able to think on my feet. And so I would just test and I would pivot and I would test, and it'd be so tech failures. And this is on a global, there was
yeah.
so many people in the room and my
Wow.
tech wouldn't work. I couldn't share things. Like, I had to make so many mistakes and I just had to keep moving forward despite anything else because we had to make it happen.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
now you've moved on from that role
Yes.
and you're, showing up in leadership and communication to help people transform one conversation at a time.
Yes.
And so how did you get to the point of doing that? Were there like how did you decide this is what you wanted to do and that was the next step? Were there whispers, nudges? What happened?
I think for me, there was a lot of whispers that I didn't listen to.
Mm.
There was little nudges that were underneath that I was like, oh no, who am I to do that? Oh no, who am I to do that?
Mm.
Oh. And then it got to a point where in the relationship dynamic with the person I was working with, we just ended up with different values. We ended up, our missions became very different. At the beginning, they were very aligned and they were such a perfect match.
Yeah.
And then as we grew and evolved, they then started to shift away from each other. And it came to a point where I either needed to settle for where I was and being in a place where it wasn't aligned, there was misalignment for me,
Mm.
or I had to take the leap of faith. And the words that I used to describe it was to go all in on me.
Yeah.
Because I'd spent my whole life living as the second, kind of like the Alfred to Batman
Yeah.
or the Robin to Batman, right? Like being that side of things. And so for me to then step into being the lead trainer of my own training company, I had to take big leaps of faith.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that was where I
exactly.
had to trust myself and I had to move. The thing that I found out about myself is that I needed to move faster than the doubt.
Yeah.
I needed to move so
Move
fast. There was no
faster than the
room.
doubt.
Yeah. I had to move so fast that there was no room for doubt.
Yes. Scrappy.
Scrappy. Yes.
Love it.
Completely scrappy. Absolutely.
Yeah. No room for doubt here. I've not got time for that. It's not got time
Yeah.
to sink in. So
None of it. Exactly.
as the leader now,
Mm-hmm.
you've shifted, you're the leader of your training and everything you do. How do you stay in alignment how do you lead from a place of alignment
Mm.
with who you are and not what other people think?
That's a tough one.
Yeah,
I think
it's
that's,
huge.
yeah. And I think that's been the biggest challenge for me moving through all of it
Mm.
is dancing between dancing on that line of my innate nature is human connection.
Yeah.
It just is. And so what I've had to work through is really finding my true north and coming back to what's true for me, because I'm only in alignment when I'm in alignment with my truth or my wants or my desires or my mission. And so for me, as I've moved through, it's like really getting clear on what my North Star is and
Mm.
then moving. And I'll notice when I'm out of it and then I just pop back on, pop back into alignment again. So I don't think that for me, there's ever been a place where I've been in total alignment the whole time. And it's just been like this glorious, magical
No,
thing.
it never
Never at
is.
all.
Hey. Yeah.
Never, never. And so I think for me, it's always being in check with myself or having someone who's in check with me.
Yes. Yeah.
And
So
so,
you know your North Star,
mhm,
what's guiding you, what's the driving force behind what it is that you're doing and how you're showing up and what you're here to impact.
mhm.
And because you know that so well, whenever you do fall out of alignment, you can easily, excuse me, get back on board because of you've got that North Star. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yes and no. Yes, I am. And I think the addition to it, so it's not really no, it's an addition to it.
Mm.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And I think it's also about knowing that I'm not rigid. I'm not rigid in that. So my North Star
Yeah.
has been the depth of, I guess Simon Sinek talks about it, finding your why or finding that
Yeah.
drive, whatever that is. And sometimes that morphs and evolves. And so I think having the people around me, and this is something that I always make sure that I have, is people who will challenge me.
Yes.
People aren't challenging me, I am off track. And I
Mm.
think it's comfortable. I think it's comfortable
Yeah.
that I'm off track. And so if I can have people around me that really challenge me to the point of discomfort that makes me move and it holds me to a higher standard, or
Mm.
it keeps me aligned with where I go, because I'm a dreamer. I'm a dreamer. And so ideas, and I love thinking about things. And so ensuring that I'm keeping myself in alignment, ensuring that I'm surrounded by others who keep me kind of bustling in towards that, that I can bounce with, is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And something I talk about quite a bit, which you've probably heard me chat about, is the idea of being an unshakable leader. And you are number two, the second person to record for the Unshakable Leader 100 series. So I just wanted to bring that in right now because what you touched on there is part of what I'm talking about when I say unshakable leadership. It's not the idea of being on all the time and getting everything right. It's about how do we intervene on ourselves and how quickly do we intervene on ourselves and come from an internal inquiry space to do that. So, what I mean by that is trusting in our own internal guidance instead of putting all the weight and all the value on the external resources, the people, the tools to figure out how to get back on track. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
And I love it. I always think about it as the inner compass,
Yeah.
having that inner compass that to navigate whatever's coming up for us, and I think for me, the unshakable, like to add with what you're talking about, I completely agree. And I think understanding who we are is the key, to all of it, understanding what our values are, what's important to us,
Yeah.
understanding how, like, we communicate. Because I think if we're going to lead, and this is why I do what I do, right? If we're
Yeah.
going to be leading people, whether it be our children,
Mm.
whether it be our loved ones, ourselves, whether we're standing in that level of leadership, I think knowing and understanding our communication and what's coming across with people is vitally important.
Yes, I agree. And that really nicely segues into my question about, what are those key parts of your personal leadership that have had to evolve or grow? Is communication one of those?
Oh my gosh, yes,
It's
absolutely.
definitely one for me. Massive one.
Massive.
Yeah.
Yeah, massive one for me too, right? I was always told, if you have nothing nice to say nothing at all.
Wow. Oof.
And so, of course, if I didn't have anything nice to say, I'd say something, but it would all be an inner dialogue.
Yes.
And so I had to learn to actually express myself. I had to learn how to say what I wanted to say. And here's the key: the thing that really had to shift for me was I had to learn how to say it so that the other person could receive it in a way in which was respectful, so that then we could have a respectful dialogue.
Yeah, so there's an access point.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And
And
we
so
can't always control how that other person responds, right? But
correct.
we do have control over, you know, how we you shared something recently on a post that I friggin' loved about how you took a pause. So someone challenged you in a
Yes,
training, I forget the context, someone challenged you and the whole energy of the room shifted.
yes.
And you took a pause
Mm-hmm.
before you responded. Can you can we use that here? Can you talk us through a bit about that?
Yeah. So for me in the past, so this is around growth, yeah, looking at
Yeah.
how did I get here? Communication being a massive thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I didn't know. So let me really preface with that is that I'd been in education for 16 years. I was a public speaker since I was 6. Like I had a
Wow.
lot going on for me in communication. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yet there were things that I didn't know, and they were the
Wow.
nuances of communication. And so when it came to this room, the old Katie did not like to be challenged or confronted. I I'm not a person who loves to have difficult conversations, and yet now I can, because
Mm.
I can hold myself in those conversations. And so I love that context is in the training room. Previously, what I would have done is talked really fast and tried to answer and respond really quickly in some really intellectual and talented way, and been all over the shop. But in that moment, that was a moment for me to practice, because I think leadership is a practice.
Oh, yes.
And so for me in that moment, I actually got to practice leadership. And leadership for me in the context of communication is being able to respond rather than react.
Yes.
And so that pause had and held so much power, because I let her have whatever she needed to say.
Mm.
And I paused and gave it, because giving pause gives so many meanings to it. And a pause in that moment could mean something totally different to someone else,
Totally.
And in that moment, though, the beautiful thing was the energy that shifted in the room. And the addition to that is I then lowered my tone.
Mm.
I lowered my tone and I spoke from there. And I spoke in a really respectful. And so that pause allowed for space for her to realize what had just gone on.
Yeah.
The
A
room
moment for
realized,
discovery.
yes. And it was so beautiful, and
Wow.
such a highlight for my team that was around me. So I have a team of people who help me run my trainings. And so it was beautiful because they actually saw and witnessed that level of leadership in the context of a big room.
Yeah. And so,
And
um, what are the kind of like opposites? I'm sitting here thinking, well, what would people tend to do in that situation? I'd think for myself, you would either get in the past, you would either get quiet, timid, you know, um, lower my tone kind of, but take it on board kind of Gemma, or the really reactive kind of like, well, blah, 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 I'm trying to think of like what are the different responses someone might have to these kind of situations. And then by listening to how you responded to that one, there's an access point. There's something to play with, you know?
yeah, and I think the biggest thing for it was, because you're exactly right. All of the things that you said are exactly what people could show up with. They could show up with aggression back, is the other option.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's avoidance. We'll just avoid the conversation. Oh, let's park that and we'll talk about it later, and they'll move it to the side.
Yeah.
Some people will, you're right, go timid, shy away. And the internal dialogue is like, I'm not good enough. Oh gosh, how have I offended them? And then they go into self-blame
Yeah, make it about
and
them. Yeah.
make it about them. Yep. And rather than like in that moment of being what's needed and what's required in this conversation.
Yes, I friggin' love that question. What
Yeah.
is needed here?
Yes. What
And
is
I imagine in the pause,
required?
that could be something you're asking, you
That's
know?
definitely what I'm asking myself.
Yeah.
So I had to learn from going, I was my old pattern of behavior was that I would blame myself. I would say
Ah,
I
yeah.
wasn't good enough. I would say that, who am I to run this room? I'd be like, they don't like me. Now I look like I've lost my authority. Like I could have gone into all these old stories. But in
Yeah.
that moment, when I just ask that question that puts it outside of me, so it's no longer actually about me, because it's not about me.
No.
It's actually not about me. And when I can pause and have that moment, what's needed here or what's required, then I actually get to come from a place where that person gets what they need, the room gets what they need, and I get what I need.
Yeah, yeah. So when
Only
you're asking yourself that question, what's needed here, what's required,
that.
are
Mhm.
you trusting the first thing that kind of pops into your intuition? Like, what's that process like for you?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I
Mm,
just trust in what's coming through. Um, it's really dependent in that
mm,
particular setting. In that particular setting, it's like I talk with my people about, I look at it from three levels. What's required here or what's needed here from a situational level, like in this situation. So I'm in a training room, we're up to day 3, where are we right now and what's required in this
yeah.
situation, and then I ask myself, like, what's showing up for them right now? Because the processes that we go through, there's a lot of inner work when it comes to
Oh,
communication.
yeah. Things rear their ugly heads.
Yeah, they come up, they're like, and sometimes people need to get it out, right?
Yeah.
They need to get it out, and sometimes it comes out and it can come across however it comes across. And so I ask what's required in the setting. Then I ask myself, what's needed for me first and foremost?
Mm,
What do I need right now? Right now, I need a moment to think about how I'm going to respectfully respond.
yeah.
And that's always my filter that I come through. What's required here or what's needed here? And then how do I respectfully respond to that person's model of the world? So
Yeah.
then I go to the third person. I leave that third person till the end. And
Mm,
I'm like, well, what is it that they need right now? And how can I meet the situations of the room with my needs and then to them? Quite often we go the opposite and we're like, well, what do I need or what do they need right now?
yes.
Then the room, then we get left out to last.
Mm.
However, for me, it's like in not all contexts, but in a lot of contexts, particularly the training room, that's where I sit.
Oh, I love that. This is gonna land with so many people.
Good.
So
Yes.
with this podcast, especially the Unshakable Leader series, it's all about real people creating real change. And so, keeping it real, are there any leadership gaps that you have right now that you're working lovingly to bridge those gaps? Like, what are you working on in terms of your own personal leadership?
Yeah, great. Letting go of control,
Oh, yes.
right? Like if we're going to, or for me in the journey that I'm on and leveling into where I am, needing to get out of the weeds and the functioning of the day and actually give people ownership rather than over functioning for them
Oh, yes.
and just allowing them to do their thing. And for me too, I think it's always that I work on something and I get it to a point, and then it's like, okay, well, what's a bigger picture of this? What's a bigger picture of this? What's my next level? And
Yeah.
I love that because in a smaller setting, it was like, oh yeah, I'm doing that. And then you go to the next and you go, oh, hang on a second, I'm wobbly.
Yeah.
And so
And
that's
the
mine is
jiggle.
letting go. Yes. Yeah. Letting go of that control. Control of the processes, control of knowing everything, control of getting things done.
Yes. Yeah. And thanks for sharing that because this is probably one of my favorite questions that I'm asking all the unshakable leaders that come in here because I feel like in this personal development overloaded world, it can often feel like we're coming from a top-down position and, telling everyone what's wrong with them and we're so shiny and bright and have everything sorted. So come buy this, follow me, do that. So I just love that question to keep it real, to show that there's always, either a performance gap or something that we are focusing our attention on to better our leadership or create change in our lives or do whatever is needed or wanted. So, yeah, appreciate that.
No worries. I think it's a great question too, because if I
Mm,
could just tag on to that, I think
yeah,
a lot of us have that feel, and we're inundated by data at the moment that we aren't good enough, that we're doing all these things wrong, that this is where it's coming from. But the truth is there's nothing wrong with us. The
yes,
truth is we just got to tap into us.
Yeah, we've just
that
got to
wholeness.
reawaken the things that are asleep or dormant or have been underutilized or the
Yeah,
things we're perhaps not aware of. It's an awareness journey of activating what's already within us because that's the answers are within you. The
yeah,
answers don't lie with um, you know, the coaches, the whatever, the astrology, the blah blah blah. It's here. And
yeah.
trusting that and trusting yourself in how to find those solutions is often the key.
And I think it's actually when we embrace that journey, it's actually
Yeah,
kind of fun. It's
I
it's
know.
it's kind I kind of love it now. It was a process that I was petrified of when I first started, particularly leading into, being an educator, safety, security of an income, to then stepping into running my own business. Like, I think I was petrified, I was nervous, I was scared. And then as you go along the journey, the more you lean into it, the more fun you can have with it and the more playfulness you can have with it, the
Yeah,
greater it is to grow. And I think we're a world full of fear of change. But what if we saw change as fun or playful or the change that we're wanting to create? And in that creation, we actually find joy and
yes,
playfulness in the discomfort.
yeah. Back to being scrappy and messy.
Scrappy and messy. It all comes back to scrappy and messy, doesn't it?
Yeah. If you take nothing away from this conversation, take away that.
Take away that today. Yes, please.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Okay, where are we? Hmm, what's next? Let's talk about being a time where you were completely in your power as a leader and you felt completely in your power. What contributed to that?
Hmm. I think there are micro moments
Mm,
where we can be completely in our power
mm,
that sometimes we don't pay attention to. And I think where I've been in my power the most is in the quietest moments when I actually hold true to what I believe,
yes.
despite what's being told around me. I think that moment, um, I had a quite traumatic moment in my life once. And I think it was in the quietness of the storm
Mm,
that's when I found my true level of leadership power. And it was that I advocated for myself. It was that I looked for a solution. I was not rigid in my thinking. Don't get me wrong. I wasn't rigid and hard against, but I was in a place of certainty that the outcome they said was impossible was possible.
mm,
And it didn't matter how I got there. It was like, actually try again, actually try again. And I just sat in that. There was no resistance. There was no fighting against something. There was just like me standing firm in what I believed was possible. And
yeah.
that was probably the deepest moment of
Mm,
leadership that I've been in. And it didn't have to be in front of a room, it didn't have to be anywhere fancy. It was between myself, the doctor, the nurses. And it was like, actually, that was where my true power was sourced, my true
yeah,
leadership. Mm.
exactly. And I bet you many people who listen to this episode will be like, hang on a minute. I've been in that situation, but
Mm.
what I perhaps didn't see it as was leadership. And so I just want to thank you for sharing that moment, or that example, because that's exactly what I'm talking about in in a nutshell. It's the
Yeah.
essence of what I do is, making leadership more accessible. And by sharing that story, I think you just have, because we're often have all these kind of outdated ideas of leadership that are very, you know, for top tier. It's not, what I'm saying is it's kind of making leadership more inaccessible,
Yes,
but your example just made leadership accessible for many, I think. Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Because
I
I think
love
that's
that.
where the power lies, right? And
Yeah.
adding, as I said before, I think leadership, I talk about communication all the time. It's a
Mm.
practice. Is my communication perfect? No. Was it something that I had to develop to get to where I am and be able to speak and present myself the way I do in what I do? Absolutely. Did I have to learn to move through the discomfort of going after what I wanted
Mm.
as a mum, as a wife, as a business owner, all of those things? And I think that's the other muscle is, and I know we're circling back to a question that you asked earlier, but I think it's really important that we
Go
talk
for it.
about it,
Mm.
is that persistence. You've got to have that persistence. And I think even if we talk about the moment that I just shared in leadership, it was about my faith, it was about my persistence, and it was about my ability to communicate even when I was in disagreements with someone. I stayed
Yeah.
in it, stayed in communication. I could not go anywhere. And
Yeah.
so I stayed with it. And I think if we take it into a business context, same thing. When I've gotten the results that I'm looking for, it's because I have faith, it's because I'm persistent, and it's because I communicate. And not from a place of power or a place of ego or anything like that. It's just from a place of that faith
Mm.
in me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Faith, persistence, and communication.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So if I'm wobbly, I know that it's one of those.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm wobbly in my faith of what I'm doing, or I could be wobbly in my persistence.
Mm.
Where's my commitment gone from it? Or where am I not communicating the way that I need to in order to get and move through life?
Yeah. And, as you share those three major points, those key points, um, that's what is in amongst being an unshakable leader, right?
Mm.
And so with those points, what does an unshakable leader mean to you? And how does it show up in your story right now? Is there more than those 3 points, or would you say that that's it for you?
I think we've covered off probably on a lot of it today.
Yeah.
I think unshakable leader is absolutely what you're talking about. It's the ability to have such self-awareness and self-knowing. I think
Hmm.
that's probably the key, is not just an awareness of it, but a knowing of yourself.
Yeah.
I think that an unshakable leader, they have that knowing and they flex and adapt according to what's needed and required around them.
Yes, they do.
And yeah, and and that makes them I think that's really the key elements of being unshakable.
Yeah. Yeah, that question, when I position it that way, it always feels like a nice little summary question of the conversation, because that's how it felt in the last episode with Jade.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that question because it just kind of ties everything up in a bow of what we've talked about.
It does. It does. It brings it all back together,
Yeah, yeah,
to
it's
that
like a
point
nice
of
little
like, what is it? And I love the individualism of it as well. I think that's a key element of how you do leadership,
Yeah.
is how you do leadership.
Yes, exactly, because
Yeah.
everyone does leadership differently. There's no often the tricky thing with leadership is we are so um kind of conditioned to do this copy paste. What is leadership? And it
Yeah.
doesn't friggin' work.
Nope.
It's
And you got to
so
find it.
ineffective.
Yes. And you have to practice it to
Yeah.
find it. Like
Yeah.
it's the weirdest thing because you got to do it the opposite. You can't find it and then practice it. You got to practice it to find it. And it's, yeah, it's a beautiful
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. And, I do wonder about, we have a major burnout problem, you
Yep.
know, in the workplace and everything. And I'm just like, well, how much of that is to do with the suppression of what you actually bring to leadership? And how much of it is you trying to do leadership from a copy paste perspective,
Mm.
So the more we can really show that leadership is about our individualized approach and our about all our quirks and and how we can bring those in and practice it as you keep saying, yeah, that can only be a good thing, I reckon.
I believe it can be, and I would agree. I think it's a lot of the burnout can be, and I wonder, I'm curious too,
Yeah, I'm
is it
curious.
from us just functioning from a place that is unnatural for us.
Yeah.
And so if we find our natural leadership style and our natural way to be in that,
Oof. Yeah,
woo,
I know. I love
thank
it. So, if people walk away with one thing from your story, I mean, I'm sure people walk away with heaps here. But what do you hope that one thing is, if you could pick one?
oh, Gemma.
I know.
So it's like, what's that one thing? Probably the undertone would be to lean in and trust yourself.
Oof. Mic drop. Lean in and trust yourself.
Yes.
Do that, people.
Do that and just see
Yeah.
where it takes you. Let us know.
Yeah, totally. Oh, I'd be keen to hear that. So thank you so much, Katie. This has been amazing. Can you tell us where people can find you if they want to learn more about your resources and how people can connect with you if they want to?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I'm a connection person. So I
Yay.
have my website, which is katiegodden.com, that has launched this year. And I also have my social media on Instagram. I'm at katie.godden, and you'll find me at Katie Godden on Facebook. Reach
Cool.
out to any of those places.
And it's a beautiful website, by the way.
It is so sexy, isn't it?
Stunning. Oh,
Delicious.
and it's sharp.
Ooh, I like that word. Yes, it
Yes,
is.
it's sharp. Okay, thank you so much, Katie.
Thanks, Gemma.